Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Energy MD podcast, where we're on a mission to help people with chronic fatigue and long COVID live their best life. And I'm really excited today because we're going to be talking with my good friend Ritamarie Loscalzo, and we're going to be talking about thyroid and nutrition. So let's learn a little bit about Dr. Ritamarie first. So she is the founder of the Institute of Nutritional Endocrinology, a passionately committed to transforming our current broken down, disease-focused system into a true healthcare system where every practitioner is skilled at finding the root cause of health challenges and uses the wisdom of nature combined with modern scientific research to restore balance. Dr. Ritamarie, a licensed doctor of chiropractic with certifications in acupuncture, nutrition, herbal medicine, and HeartMath, specializes in insulin, thyroid, adrenal, and digestive imbalances. She's also a master at using palate-pleasing, whole, fresh food as medicine and is a best-selling author, speaker, and internationally recognized nutrition and functional health authority with over 30 years of clinical experience. Her podcast, Reinvent Healthcare, provides health and wellness practitioners around the globe to be part of the movement to provide root cause care to people in need. Dr. Ritamarie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Evan. It's a pleasure and an honor.
So we're going to be talking about energy boosting nutrition strategies for thyroid support and managing autoimmunity as well. So let's talk about thyroid. So how did you get into this field? Why did thyroid become so important for you in endocrinology?
Yeah. So, some of it came from my own health issues, right? But some of it came from just seeing people and knowing that the way that it's taught to look at thyroid health, right? Test a TSH, and if it's fine, the person's fine, in spite of the fact that they have low energy, they're gaining weight, they're cold, they're depressed, and they're constipated. But it's not a thyroid problem because TSH is normal. And better than anybody that was an inadequate way to look at it. And I kept seeing people with thyroid imbalances, like in school, we were like, oh, thyroid imbalances, or Robbins, I think it's Robbins' textbook of medicine, one of those textbooks of medicine. Thyroid issues are not things you're going to see very much in your practice. Well, fast forward 35 years, 40 years, and it's what we're seeing all over the place. And if it was infectious, right, we'd call it a pandemic, we'd call it an epidemic, but it's not communicable. So it's just a problem that some people have, and we have a solution for, which is give them T4. I mean, in a nutshell, I don't think that works. And I kept seeing people over and over were on the T4 and they still were having symptoms. And I'm like, there's other things going on here. Then, look, and nobody was testing for autoimmune. And 90% of people with low thyroid function, it's autoimmune. Can we look at autoimmune, and then can we address the immune system? Can we address the toxic environment? Can we address all these other things? So that's how I got passionate about it, because my heart goes out to people who have been trying for a long time to get well, and they're still struggling. And so I started focusing on that. And one thing that I did find was that so many people have blood sugar imbalances, and now we're finding 93% of the population is metabolically unwell. Their blood sugars and the insulin levels are off the charts and ruined. And you can't really fix the thyroid unless you fix that. So then I look back, okay, what is it? Well, nutrition, nutrient imbalances, foods, toxins in the food, toxins in the water, toxins in the plastic food containers people are eating out of, right? So I was like, okay, we've got to focus on this. So that's one of the things I focus on is thyroid. And, the whole nutritional endocrinology, it's actually a funny story, if you don't mind me taking a minute to tell it, how I came up with that. So I was having surgery on my elbow. I had broken an arm and my bone got displaced and I had to have surgery, and I didn't want anesthetics. And, we went through this whole thing. I said, I have my ways, I'll relax myself. So I'm chatting with the anesthesiologist. How many people do you know having surgery or chatting with the anesthesiologist, right? It doesn't really happen. And I'm like, this is going to be going on for a while. We talked about this, and his kid was into baseball and so is mine, blah, blah, blah. And then the conversation kind of halted. I said, you know what? Why don't you just ask me anything you want to about nutrition? I'll talk for a couple of hours and I won't even realize that I'm having surgery. And he goes, oh, nutrition. What branch of nutrition are you interested in? And I thought, branch of nutrition. I never thought about a branch of nutrition. And as I thought about what I loved to work with people on, it was all hormone related. So I said nutritional endocrinology. And that's how the name of my institute, the name of my programs came about, was because it just came to me. And I'm like, oh my God, am I going to remember this? Am I going to remember after my surgery that I said this? And I did. And I went and got the URL that afternoon. And that was it. So I just have had a passion for endocrinology because hormones control everything and they don't get credit. When you say to somebody, oh, I help people balance hormones, they go, oh, hot flashes, low libido. They think the bedroom, right? They don't realize that all of what I call the everyday hormones affect everything in life. And all of those hormones, that the everyday hormones affect our energy level, which is what you're the brilliant master at. How do you help people with energy? Well, you have to balance their hormones to have them have the right kind of energy. So,
Yeah. So nutrition is the study of food and food science, right? And then endocrinology is the study of hormones. So let's put them together. Let's talk about nutrition in the context of thyroid. How can you improve thyroid health by focusing on nutrition?
yeah. So first of all, the thyroid is a very delicate organ, right? It's so sensitive to toxins. So you start with, a low toxin diet, right? Organic foods, organic products, etc. So that's super important. And that's going to take some of the load that goes on the thyroid. The foods we eat are so important for the thyroid because in order to make thyroid hormone, we need the amino acid tyrosine. How do we get that? Well, we have to eat protein and have it well digested. Oh, we have to look at the stomach acid and how is the digestion working? So super important for thyroid function and oftentimes overlooked. And then iodine. And there's a whole controversy. I don't know where you stand on the iodine controversy that exists out there right now, but iodine's evil, iodine's bad. We can't have iodine. It's going to wreck your thyroid. Well, the truth of the matter is we need the Goldilocks amount of iodine, or without it, you can't make thyroid hormone, right? You need iodine and tyrosine, and you have to make it. Then you need all these other nutrients to help those processes along, right? You need magnesium, you need zinc, you need vitamin B6 and a bunch of other vitamin B2. You need these nutrients to actually have the thyroid do its job and make the hormones, right? So it's really important that we have a clean diet, that we have the right nutrients, and that we have the balance of those nutrients, not too little, not too much. And look around, like with what people are eating, it doesn't fit that bill, right? The standard American diet doesn't fit that bill. So it's super important for that. And then we can look at autoimmune, right? 90% of all low thyroid function is because there's an autoimmune process, Hashimoto's. There's a small percentage that might be hyperthyroid, Graves' disease. But the truth of the matter is so many people have autoimmune, and autoimmune conditions can be turned around with nutrition, with lifestyle, with stress management, and all the things that help support a healthy thyroid. So that's how I put them all together. Oh, and don't forget selenium. I didn't even mention selenium because most doctors aren't even looking as how well is T4, which is made by the thyroid or taken externally, converted to T3. And that's what I found really early on, was that these people who were taking all this synthetic T4, when you look at their numbers in full, they didn't have enough T3 because the body wasn't able to convert because they're stressed out, there's too much cortisol, there's inflammatory cytokines, and they don't have enough selenium.
Yeah, there's so much that you just mentioned that I want to kind of touch on. A lot of people don't really realize that T4 is actually the tyrosine, the amino acid that you were talking about, and the number of iodines that are around it, right? So T4 and then T3, and then there's T1 and T2, but we don't really talk that much about those. But yeah, so I think that's really important. And then the other thing too is that thyroid is not just, or hypothyroidism is not just low thyroid, where you're supposed to take Synthroid or levothyroxine and that fixes the problem. The reality is that the root cause is that there's something that's triggering the immune system to attack the thyroid. And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw this really early in practice where you'd see people and all their thyroid numbers looked good. Even when I did the full panel of, T3, T4, free T3, free T4, et cetera, plus TSH, but they still were having symptoms. And then I started thinking, what's going on here? Well, the doctors didn't check the antibodies. So how can the thyroid be healthy, right? How can we have enough of the right thyroid hormones in the system if the body's being attacked? And sometimes that attack will happen like a couple of years before that. But further than that, and this is critically important because it affects nutrition affects it, is the receptors. I don't care how much thyroid hormone there is in the blood. What I care about is how much is in the cells. And if the receptors are not allowing that thyroid hormone to get deep into the cell, it has to actually get to the nucleus to affect the metabolic rate. If that doesn't happen, then we can have everything look normal. And that's where people are walking away. Their prescription is fine because their numbers look normal, but it's not getting into the cells. And that's nutritionally defined as well, right? So we need vitamin A for those receptors. It's a retinol dependent process to transmit that thyroid through the receptors. Homocysteine, I don't know about you, but I see people with ragingly high homocysteine or even marginally high homocysteine. Homocysteine affects those thyroid receptors. So there's all sorts of things. And then inflammation, right? Inflammation affects the thyroid receptors, and inflammation is rampant today in our society. And so we know that we can use food and herbs and nutrients to help bring down inflammation. And of course, there's the stress that causes those inflammatory cytokines that we can control when we have a balanced program and help people to get the stress under control.
So let's talk a little bit about laboratory testing. I used to check autoimmunity. I don't check it anymore because of the stats that you mentioned. 90% of people are autoimmune anyway, and I feel like it's unpredictable when depending on the time of day that you get it and stuff like that. But I'm curious about your thoughts, since you're the expert in this. Do you test for those? And then what other thyroid lab testing do you like to see?
Absolutely. Yes, I do test for it. And most of the reasons for me doing lab tests is to convince people that there's something wrong and that they need to take action. So then I talk to them because I want to talk to them about healing their gut to heal their thyroid. And they're like, oh, well, you have an autoimmune condition, and the autoimmune condition is related to stressors, right? And one of the big stressors is leaky gut. So it actually helps me to get people to move, to take action. But what do I like? I like the TSH, right? That's the one everybody tests. But T4, total T4, which tells me how much the thyroid's actually making. A lot of docs are skipping that. Free T4, which tells me how are we unbinding the thyroid from the carrier protein. And that can be related to either testosterone or estrogen. And we see so many people that are either low or high in those and on birth control pills and all. So that's affected there. So I want to see how is it converted, because we can look at total T4 and go, everything's fine. Well, it's not. We can look at free T4 and say, well, everything's fine, because we have to then look at T3. So I look at free T3. I mean, if they give me total T3, I can deal with it, but I don't really need it. What I really want to see is the total, to see the capacity of the thyroid, whether it's actually able to produce it. And then I want to see the free, and I want to see the free T3. And that gives me an idea of active. And the free T3 is the active one, right? That's what gets into the cells and affects metabolic rate. So if T4 looks great, but T3 doesn't, what's causing that conversion to fall apart? And then we work on that. I sometimes do reverse T3. It's expensive and I don't usually need it because I can kind of guess it from everything else. Yeah, and that's about it. And if somebody is having hyperthyroid symptoms, in addition to TPO and antithyroid globulin, I'll throw in a TSI, thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin. So that's what I like to test.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about this relationship with the gut, and there's so much of the immune system in the gut and all that. So can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the thyroid and the gut?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just talked about the T4 to T3 conversion, and people think that, oh, the T3 is low, so it's a thyroid problem. It's not necessarily a thyroid. You can have a perfectly functioning thyroid, but you have low thyroid function because it's not converting. Well, 50% of that happens in the liver, 25%. These are approximate numbers, happen in the gut. So if the gut is whacked out, the microbiome's out of balance, the gut isn't working properly, then that conversion can't happen very well. When we have leaky gut, inflammation in the gut that allows antigens or broken down food particles that shouldn't get into the bloodstream, right? They get into the bloodstream and it creates an immune reaction, right? And then the immune reaction, there's all kinds of theories about how that immune reaction can lead to autoimmunity, but molecular mimicry, like those look similar to the particular organ, in this case, the thyroid. What's the other one? Cross-reactivity, drive-by shooting, right? Happens to be in the way of the immune system attacking the broccoli in your bloodstream, and it gets the thyroid. So we need to be looking at the gut. And if you look at studies, the studies will show that there's virtually nobody that has an autoimmune disease that doesn't also have a leaky gut. Mm-hmm. So it's just a critical first step to address it. And if you're not testing it, great. It's still a critical first step to address, because you're going to assume that they're in the 90%.
Yeah, and I think it's, I don't know what the stats are, but yes, the almost everybody has a leaky gut in today's environment, unfortunately, right, because of all those exposures that we have. Right. So I'm glad you brought that up. So coming back to the laboratory test for a moment, I'm apt to say that all labs are imperfect. So there are times where, if somebody still has low thyroid symptoms, and their labs look normal, even by your standards, my standards, functional medicine, what do you do at that point?
I assume receptor resistance. In fact, I assume receptor resistance from the start. So even if I've identified, there's a conversion issue. The ratio between the free and the bound hormones is off, and we're going to address that. I'm assuming that there's a receptor problem because there's no test for it, right? And inflammation causes it. How many people have inflammation, right? Inflammation causes it. Stress causes it. Excess or too little cortisol causes it, right? Nutrients like vitamin A, like we talked about, and homocysteine being high, which could be B6, B12, or folate. So I just assume everybody has receptor resistance, and I work with them on those things.
Mm-hmm. And have you found, which of those do you find is the biggest bang for the buck when it comes to turning on the receptors? Is it the vitamin A, or is it a combination of all those?
I think it's a combination. I think there's the way the human body works. It's just so complicated that you can never, nothing is single factorial, right? There's always multiple factorial factors in there. And the majority of people who come in who have thyroid problems, they're also stressed out because their adrenals are not functioning maybe properly because of the stress. And look around, right? People have a hard time not being stressed with the state of the world right now, and with constant addiction to listening to the news to hear of the latest, earthquake here, disaster there. And everybody is taking on the whole world's stressors in addition to their family stresses and their own. So I think it's really common. And I think receptor resistance is super critical to be looking at. We want to get it in. We want to get that thyroid in. It doesn't matter if it's in the bloodstream.
Yeah, I almost never pay attention to the news, but for some reason I've kind of gone down this path a little bit, especially I'm Jewish and the whole Israel thing. And, there's just a lot of different information out there. I'm trying to get educated, and I'm just finding that it's totally stressing me out. I almost threw my phone across the room today because I spent an hour on YouTube Shorts, just kind of doing a bunch of education, and it was just not the best use of my time. And so I know that you're trained in HeartMath. What sort of strategies do you have for people to kind of get out of this stressful time right now?
I would say you turn off the news. You are going to hear if anything really critical,
right?
Because somebody's going to tell you. I mean, I've had people do that to me. Oh, well, what's your take on the Middle East crisis? I'm like, I'd rather not think about it or talk about it because I can't do anything about it. And I'm just going to get my system in an uproar if I do. So I think that's a first way. And if they're not willing to do that, at least limit the amount of time, at least maybe play some relaxing music before and after, meditate before you watch the news, meditate after. When you start to feel yourself getting in an uproar, stop yourself. HeartMath is a great way that you can do quickly to shift from sympathetic, which is what we're in when we watch the news, face it, to parasympathetic. If there were kitties and weddings and babies being born on the news, then there would be a different story, but that doesn't sell. People don't, they don't, the advertisers wouldn't be happy with that, right? It doesn't keep people, glued to the TV or the radio or whatever.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit more about HeartMath?
Yeah. For years, I wanted to meditate. I'm a type A, go, 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 go. My brain is always thinking, and I knew I needed to calm it down. And so I tried meditation and I did classes. And well, you have to do it when you first wake up in the morning, and it should be at least an hour, but you have to get out of bed to do it because you'll fall back asleep, and don't do it around meals and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, there's too many rules. And for me to have my mind not active for that long a period of time felt like a prison sentence, actually. So I was looking for some other things, and I discovered HeartMath, the Institute of HeartMath, incredible research on how you can actually shift yourself from sympathetic, which is where a lot of people live during the day, to parasympathetic, which is where all healing happens, right? So those are the two branches of the nervous system, the fight, flight, or the calm, relaxed. And what I found was that with a really simple strategies, you can stop yourself. And I can actually do this on like webinars or events that I'm leading. And I just say, let's just take a moment to transition from where we just came from, whatever that was, into a relaxed state. And we take them through. All you really need to do is focus on your heart, focus on appreciation. Remember like something that you really loved in your life. Like for me, I'm on the beach. I'm walking in, I feel the waves, I feel the sun, and I can just go, and then I can feel appreciation for that. And that's it. I mean, I could do that when you practice it, you can do it in 30 seconds. If you don't practice it at the beginning, it's going to take longer. But they actually have this little device you can stick on your ears. That's not what HeartMath is. The device is a way to measure, to see if you're making the shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic. But you don't need it. But a lot of people do because they get that feedback, right? When those devices first came out, my son was little. He's 25 now, so he's not so little anymore. But we were on a plane, and I took it out, and I'm like, he goes, "What is that, Mom?" And I told him what it was, and he goes, "Let me try it." And he took it. He was probably 6 at the time, and he tries it, and he puts the thing on, and he goes, "Mom, look, I figured it out." So I went, "Oh, I got a few minutes. I'm going to read," because he's dealing with this other thing. Because, "Mom, look at this. I figured it out." I'm like, "What do you mean?" So he takes it has a readout. It goes into red when you're in sympathetic, and it goes into green when you're in para, and there's lines in between. He goes, watch what I could do. And he went, and he got all upset, and he goes, "Look," and it went into the red. He goes, "Now watch." And he got it into the green. Right? So it's that easy to shift. And I didn't even have to teach him the method. I just kind of knew, because I always would say, "Let's breathe. Okay, everybody's agitated. Let's breathe." So he just did what he'd been taught. So it's a way to take a pause break, and you can do it anytime throughout the day. It's not like you have to sit for an hour and make sure that you're, whatever, have an altar and yoga and you're in a right pose. No, you just have to do this and take an appreciation break throughout your day, and it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. My question was going to be how important is this for overall healing? How important is this for healing autoimmunity and healing the thyroid? What do you think?
I think it's really critical. And whether you use HeartMath, or whether you do tapping, or whether you take a yoga break or whatever, it's throughout the day. It's not just meditating first thing in the morning. Now, I meditate first thing in the morning. I've been doing it for 2,283 days straight, because I wear a little headband that keeps me doing it. But I do 15 minutes. Sometimes I do 5 if that's all I have. I don't do an hour. And I don't have that pressure on myself. Oh, I can sit for 15 minutes, and I can, listen to the waves on my little device, and I can do that. So I do that. But this thing I do throughout the day. You just take a breathe break. And I find that I have seen people with autoimmunity have their antibodies drop down. Yeah, we're addressing diet. Yeah, we're addressing all the other stuff. But when they don't do this, like when I'm working with people on blood sugar, I teach them this, and I'll be like, but I'm eating all that good food, and I'm this, and I'm not eating before bed. And why am I still okay? Let's take, how often are you doing that HeartMath technique I taught you? Well, I remember once or twice a week. I teach you to do it 5 times a day, before every meal, beginning of the day, end of the day, and any time in between that you start to feel the stress build up. And like anything else, you practice, right? If you're doing it before every meal, it's not, you're not waiting to be stressed, because it's hard when you're used to being stressed and then, you're trying to do this technique to get you unstressed unless you've practiced it. So I find it super important, super important.
And it costs nothing. So for people who are listening to this and you want something practical to do, that is one of those things, that you have control over, that you can manage, that plays such a big role, that puts you into your parasympathetic so that you can heal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I have to re-record them. They're like 14 years old, but I recorded a series of not 30 days. I call it the 30-day stress transformation. And it's just me guiding people through. And there's other more advanced techniques that HeartMath teaches, but those are 5-minute audios every day, except the first one to teach and the last one to transition. But I still use that in all my programs.
Brilliant. Yeah, so important. So let's switch a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about the relationship between thyroid and adrenals. So one interesting thing that I saw a while back, a number of years ago, that I've noticed since, and I'll be curious about your take on it, is that when somebody has thyroid issues or when somebody has adrenal issues and you're looking at the thyroid labs seem to be falsely elevated. They look better than they would normally appear, because then you treat the adrenals and then all of a sudden the thyroid labs actually come down. So they look worse after you treat the adrenals. And I'm curious, my take on that is that the thyroid has been falsely elevating itself, that it's been compensating for low adrenals, and then it can show its true colors when the adrenals are supporting themselves. I'm curious if you've seen that, and I'm curious what your take is on that.
That's an interesting perspective that I haven't thought about it that way before. I think about the interaction between the thyroid and the adrenals in terms of the effects of cortisol on thyroid conversion, the effects of cortisol on the receptors, the effects of cortisol on TSH. And I wonder, given that perspective, I'm not sure how to answer that, because it's not right, something I really thought about it in that way, that the thyroid is responding to the adrenal being, right, the cortisol being, not working properly. I mean, it could be, because I see it as there's either the adrenals are either producing too much cortisol overall and somebody's in that sympathetic dominant state, or they've been doing that for so long that they're not producing enough cortisol. I wonder if it has to do with, so cortisol's a precursor, or not precursor, it's in that steroid hormone pathway, right? So pregnenolone at the top and progesterone and estrogen, and our bodies naturally want to keep us alive, right? As opposed to making babies. So, and that's just a simple way to say it, but like, given the choice between having libido and having fertility and all that, or staying alive, keeping away from the tiger, we're going to go that way. So we drain those pathways down to thyroid, because the thyroid, the adrenal, the cortisol, right? So we drain those pathways down to cortisol, and then we experience what you probably see a lot when people are stressed out and fatigued, is that they have no sex drive. They have difficulty getting pregnant. Their periods are a mess. They have PMS. They have terrible menopause symptoms if that's the age they're in. And when we get the stress piece under control, when we get the actual stress, right, whatever those stressors are, and they could be a mental, emotional stressors, but also physiologic stressors from toxins in the food, etc. When we get those things under control, then the other systems work better. When the other systems work better, that might relate to the thyroid, because like estrogen, if there's too much estrogen, we're going to have too much of the binding globulin, the thyroid binding globulin. If we have not enough estrogen or too much testosterone, we have too little of it, and we see a lot more free thyroid. So when we have less of the bound and more of the free thyroid, we might be seeing that the thyroid is, pushing itself to function. I don't know. It's an interesting question. And then of course there's reverse T3, right? Which the body tries to put on the brakes, right? When there's an illness, when there's an inflammation somewhere, an infection somewhere, we think, oh, let's just get that T3 up. No, let's think about, why is that T3 suppressed? Because the body's putting on the brakes to try to deal with healing.
Yeah, and would you say that reverse T3 is a stress marker, or how would you use it practically? What does it tell you?
Yeah, I mean, when I see the reverse T3 being elevated, yeah, it's kind of like the body saying, whoa, slow down. We've got to slow down. We've got to put on the brakes, because we got to focus on these other things. And if you just have this high metabolic rate and you have all this energy and people are out there, jumping and swimming and skiing and whatever, the body's not going to necessarily heal on the inside. So I do see it as a protective mechanism. Absolutely. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about mitochondria and thyroid. What's the relationship there? And if you can just remind us what mitochondria is.
Sure. So mitochondria are these little powerhouses in every cell, and that's where our energy is made. So we feed it with oxygen and glucose, and then it goes through this process. And I go like this because it's called the Krebs cycle that happens. And there's a series of biochemical processes that take that glucose and oxygen and take it through and spit out ATP, 36 for every molecule of glucose if things are working right. So we spit out energy. So mitochondria are affected. So every cell in the body is affected by thyroid because it affects metabolic rate. And if the metabolic rate of any area of the body is low, we're going to have sluggish function, which is why we see depression and constipation and dry skin and, those sorts of things when the thyroid's not functioning well. So if the mitochondria don't have the oomph that they need to take the glucose and turn it around, plus if there's deficiencies of any of the nutrients that are in there, plus if there's toxicity, and if there's, foods that are containing toxins, environmental toxins, then that's going to affect the functioning of the mitochondria. Because again, I think what we overlook a lot is like low mitochondrial function. Yeah, it might be related to nutrient imbalance, but it could also be related to like the high reverse T3, the brakes, right? We're sensing that it's not safe. Therefore, we're going to turn on the brakes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all those heavy metals, chemicals, molds, infections, and trauma are informing that. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's rampant right now, right? The trauma for sure. Everybody's like emotionally traumatized over the last few years. And I think that's part of why we don't see people really healing when they get that infection, right? Their body is traumatized, and then it brings up the old imbalances, infections, inflammations, etc. So yeah, I think that all those things need to be taken into account if somebody wants to get well. It's not just, what's the best herb for this? Do you see that a lot? You see people saying, what's the best herb for this? And you're like, well, I wish it was that easy. I wish it was that simple that I could just give you an herb. And because we're looking for that approach, because that's what everybody's been trained in, because that's what Western medicine teaches. But no, we have to tease it all out and find all the interactions between the different systems, between the nutritional endocrinology, and hormones are affecting everything, right? Not just your sex drive. It's affecting everything, not just your thyroid, not just your insulin levels. It's affecting everything, right? There's gazillion hormones in the gut, more so than anywhere else, right? So the hormones are affecting function. They're the master controllers. So we need to keep them healthy and happy. And the toxins just affects all the activation pathways and the receptor pathways and everything. Yeah.
So in that vein, and just a couple questions before I let you go. So what about herbs for thyroid healing, knowing that, this is more complex and you have to focus on the causes and all that?
Yeah. So, yes, you have to focus on the causes, but there's one herb that helps to increase production of thyroid hormone, and that's ashwagandha. It's an Ayurvedic herb. It is a nightshade, so people who are completely sensitive to nightshades may have to be careful about it. The contraindication to using ashwagandha is if you have hyperthyroid, right? So if you find yourself with a racing heart and sweaty palms and losing weight, do not take ashwagandha. It's going to make you worse, right? If you do have those sorts of things that can slow down the thyroid function are, we can look at lemon balm. That's a very common one. Cabbage juice, and there's a number of things like that. For the majority of people who have a hypothyroid, I think ashwagandha is good. Anything that calms down the nervous system and calms down the stress system is good. So there's any number of nervines and relaxing herbs like rhodiola, and there's tulsi, which is holy basil, and all these things can be helpful. I don't think there's a prescription for a condition when it comes to herbs. You've got to look at what else does that herb do. Mm-hmm. And how does it fit the person? Kind of like homeopathy, similar. You have to look at the full picture, not just, oh, this person's primary complaint is hypothyroid, therefore this affects the thyroid. But like, for example, somebody's in raging menopause and you give them ashwagandha, they can get worse because it's a heating herb, right? And so what I believe that with herbs, we try. I'm a tiny dose kind of person. You try a small dose, increase it, and see if you get the minimum effective dose to get the desired effects. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Start low, go slow. And I think it's important for people to realize that, if you take ashwagandha and you're not noticing a difference, it doesn't mean that ashwagandha isn't right for you. It's like a puzzle when you're working on all these different causes and, root causes and even natural band-aids, where a lot of them have to fit together, where, a number of, you've got to have the nutrition and the additional hormonal support, and then you plug in the ashwagandha and then it works.
Right. Exactly. It's just very different. It's a very different way to think about things. It's a whole paradigm shift to go from Western medicine to using a more holistic and natural approach. And, you've been on both ends of the spectrum. So that there's definite advantages to Western medicine, which is a this for that. You just got bonked in the head and you're bleeding out and your head is, there's things that you do for those sorts of things. But the long-term effects are not there when you just take a drug to numb down the pain. We have to look at why is the pain there in the first place, and how can we adjust the diet, the lifestyle, the attitude, and heal old traumas to get there. Yeah.
Amen.
Yep.
So you've got a couple of free gifts for our folks here. You've got a hormone hacking breakfast menu and a hormone balancing elixirs. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Sure, absolutely. The breakfast one is, how do you start the day? Whether you eat breakfast or not, a lot of people intermittent fast and don't start eating until noon or later, but it's what's that first meal of the day to keep your hormones balanced throughout the day. And I give you 5 different components that need to be in that meal. And then I give you menu plans and recipes. It's life-changing for some people. The other one, the elixirs, these are like, I got really interested in elixirs probably about 10 years ago. And I started combining herbs and nutrients and foods to make these things that had, this might have more of an effect on detoxification. This one might have an effect on thyroid. It might have an effect on adrenals. So there's a bunch of different, very tasty recipes in there that you can make instead of the morning coffee. Not that everybody has to get off their morning coffee, but these are going to actually affect the way that the body works, instead of just stimulating and then having that letdown. So I use a bunch of herbs, and there's a little chart in there that shows you how to mix and match and how to make your own combinations. And there's one is the thyroid adrenal one that's in there. I found that there were people who started using it and they're like, oh, let me give this a try. And one person said, my hair came back. I had this thick head of hair and my hair was falling out and my hair started coming back. I'm like, okay, that's good. So other people heard her say that because she said it on a coaching call, and they're like, oh, let me try it. And I just kept getting these reports about how their hair was growing back from this elixir. So we can't call it the hair regrowth elixir, but it's
I love that. Well, we'll put the links below and in the show notes.
Okay.
And then best place for people to find you will be at drritamarie.com. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I'm there. And then I'm on Facebook at Dr. Ritamarie, Dr. Ritamarie, and Facebook and Instagram and all over the place. So yeah, and YouTube too.
Excellent. And then I'm really excited about the challenge you've got coming up, the fasting while feasting. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So fasting is a miraculous for many people for many conditions, and it can really turn things around by giving the whole body a break. But not everybody can do it. Not everybody can do it with their lifestyle the way they are. You got 6 kids running around, and fasting is not a good thing to do. And some of the health conditions. But a few years back, there was a researcher named Walter Longo who came up with this idea of the fasting mimicking diet. And he did a lot of research and checking to how can we mimic the effects, the positive effects of fasting while not having to fast. And so he came up with this idea, and then he came out with a product line, which is powdered stuff that's made easy, but I like real food. So I decided that I would take on the challenge of creating menus for 5 days. And this was something you just do for 5 days. You don't do it every day because your metabolism will slow down too much, but 5 days. And you're eating, and people say to me, do I have to eat all the food I'm supposed to on that day? Or can I skip some because I'm so full and satiated? And I'm like, oh, whatever you want to do. You don't have to. But it's just, this is the maximum that you can do. And we give them recipes, and for 5 days they do it. I mean, literally have seen people who were on insulin and metformin and had been diabetic for 15 years go and completely go off their metformin and got their insulin down to like 25% with the supervision of their doctor. And, but that's what was happening to people. And ketones went up, glucose goes down, insulin levels regulate. And when you repeat this on a monthly basis, depending on how much weight you have to lose or how far off your hormones are, it just has this cumulative effect.
Wow, amazing. So if people are interested in that, if they opt in for any of the free stuff, they'll get notified.
They'll get notification, right? We'll probably start announcing it at the end of December because we're going to be doing it in, I think, the second week in January.
Excellent. It's very exciting, and lots of good work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Ritamarie.
Yeah, it's fun. We got to change the world. That's the thing. And the thing that turns me on and lights me up is seeing people who have been struggling. And I'm sure you find this every day in your practice as well. They've been struggling for so long, and we just kind of find those fine tunings that they need to do, and suddenly they get their life back. And that's the most rewarding thing I can think of.
I agree.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Ritamarie. It was great to be with you. I really appreciate your sharing your knowledge with our community.
Thank you.
I hope you learned something on today's podcast. If you did, please share it with your friends and family and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It's really helpful for getting this information out to more people who desperately need it. Sharing all the experts I know and love and the powerful tips I have is one of my absolute favorite things to do. Thanks for being part of my community. Just a reminder, this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. It is provided with the understanding that it does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Thanks for listening, and have an amazing day.